and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? When will I think of new questions to ask? I'm very excited to introduce our guest today. Before I do that, just so you know who else is talking, I want to make sure you know about the other panelists. So I'm Richard Littauer. I'm your host. I'm also a co-host with Eric Berry today. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing right and dandy. I'm glad you are
right
too.
And dandy. Good. Better than left and dandy. And Justin, how are you doing?
I'm really good. I've been up for 2 hours. Really excited about today's show. You're going to love it. I guarantee it.
Sounds like you need more coffee, but I'm glad that you are here. Excellent. All right. And our guest today, our guest is Marko Saric. Marko is joining us from his home in Belgium. He is the co-founder of Plausible Analytics. Plausible Analytics is an alternative to Google Analytics, which is open source, simple, lightweight, less than a kilobyte. I don't know how that's going to happen. All their code is less than a kilobyte. We're going to get into that later. And a privacy-friendly alternative to Google Analytics, which is fantastic. Can't wait to get into what that is. Before we do that, Marko, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very well, Richard. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for coming on. So you are the co-founder. That means that there's another founder. Which hat do you wear? Are you the technical guy or the marketer? Which one?
Yeah, so I'm the marketer. My co-founder, Uku, is doing all the design, development, all the kind of GitHub stuff, management of the community there. While I joined him at maybe a few months into development, I joined him to kind of help him with the communication and the marketing side of things. So all the tech questions, I'm not sure if I can answer.
There will be
That's
none.
okay. We don't talk about tech on this show. We only talk about open source. Wait a minute. So, Marko, how long has Plausible Analytics been around?
So the development started in December 2018. I think the first version, like beta, came in early 2019, maybe February. The first kind of the paid product was released in mid 2019, I think May, June. And then maybe 8 months after that, so something like February, March 2020, so last year, I joined as a co-founder. So basically, we've been around for, let's say 2 years.
So that's during COVID. You've been around pretty much. At some point, you had 0 subscribers. How many do you have now?
4,600, I believe. Something along those lines. We're about 37K MRR, US dollars. So yeah, that's the state. So when I joined, which was March last year, we were about, I think there was like 100 something MRR. And we had less than 100 subscribers. So the first, say, 1 year of Plausible compared to the last year was like a huge change. And we were fortunate, I guess, to have such huge growth and spike in traffic and interest in everything over the last year and a half. So it's right now, at this stage, very sustainable for an open source project.
I mean, there's a reason why that happened. It's because you joined. And I saw yesterday, there was an article on Hacker News on how the before and after of you joining, and you see the MRR and users from before you joined and then after you joined. So that's what I think is really interesting and what's really cool, because it shows that there is a huge need, especially in open source and those open source projects that eventually turn into businesses, is how important your role is. So I guess my first question for you is, one thing that really is hard with analytics, because I've seen this with Netlify, is how do you handle the bots? Like, how much of a threat are they to the bottom line in terms of making sure that they don't mess up someone's expectations in terms of traffic? I'm not talking like technical, just like it's a problem, right?
I think I would say I'm a marketer, so I'm always caring about accurate data and so on. And actually, because I was trying to explore the privacy first aspect, even before I joined Plausible, I actually installed I got access to server logs, which for me is not something I'm used to. So I got access to server logs and I was like, let me check this data. And that data, from my perspective, from the web analyst, I know there's value in the server logs from like a sysadmin kind of perspective to check the server and all that. There's a lot of value there. But from like a web analyst perspective, as a marketer, to see what's going on site, server logs have so many bots included. Like my own site, because it was alive for maybe more than 10 years now, and I have a lot of like Google bots and all the kind of links from everywhere. So my site is something like 18 times more traffic on my server log than on Plausible, all because of non-human traffic. So In terms of bots, there are big issues in general. But in terms of like having JavaScript analytics, like a little JavaScript snippet, and doing a few things on top of that, pretty much I would say we handle like bots same way as Google Analytics. So there's not really, in that sense, we don't really have many issues with bot traffic. So like there's actually one study I did on our blog, which actually I just took screenshots of my server logs and Plausible, same period, same website, everything. As like, I think it was 18 times more page views and visitors on the server logs. So like we're kind of free of bots. Obviously, if somebody tries really, really hard to like make himself look like a human, that kind of slips through sometimes even in Google Analytics. So, but in general, kind of an average website should be afraid of bots by using JavaScript analytics. There's not much problems with that.
That's good to hear because, I mean, as a marketer and as you just brought up, it's so important to have accurate data and seeing where people are actually coming from. Which brings me up to my next thing is how I found you is you wrote a blog post called Tech Savvy Audiences Block Google Analytics. And it kind of opened my mind going, oh, there might be a problem here because the audience I target is highly technical, or tech savvy. So how has this issue that you've been shining a light on converted people that are so like Google dependent in terms of Google Analytics and everything else to kind of turn over to a paid service like yours? Like, how has the shift been since you've been brought on board and starting to send out that messaging?
Yeah, I mean, this post was published less than 3 weeks ago. So I had an article about how I switched from Mac to Linux. So I wrote a post on my blog, all the kind of details on how I did it as a kind of non-technical user, because Linux has an idea of all technical users, but I like wrote it as a normal person. So I wrote that, and like a year after I wrote it, suddenly it found itself on the top of Hacker News. So that was like maybe 4 weeks ago. And luckily enough, August was like, I'm going to install Google Analytics on my blog just to see what the current state of ad blocking is. And so luckily I had the Google Analytics at the time where this post was on Hacker News, and it was on Reddit, on our Linux, and so on. So I don't remember the exact numbers. There was tens of thousands of visitors then. So I was able to actually compare Google Analytics with the normal installation that pretty much every website uses, just a JavaScript snippet in the header, versus Plausible using our little proxy installation, which basically runs Plausible script from my website as the first-party connection. So I was able to compare these two things. And you found, I think, 58% of the traffic was using ad blockers. So that was missing from Google Analytics completely. So I was like, this is like for marketers, but just in general, it's a kind of newsworthy thing to consider. And so we published that post with the kind of the screenshots again, comparing the Google Analytics and Plausible. And again, luckily, this went on top of Hacker News itself as well. So I think it's been now in 16 days or so since that was published. We're reaching about 800 new trial subscribers in those 16 days or so.
Wow.
For Plausible. Before then, our best month ever was about 1,200 subscribers, trial signups. So now 800 or so in 2 weeks or so. It just tells you that it kind of hit the sweet spot or whatever you want to call it. There is, at least it kind of raised some awareness that obviously everyone knows the ad blockers are there, but how heavy the usage is, at least for some audiences. And it helps us communicate our message across. Like one of the things we're saying is like, okay, Plausible is privacy first, no cookies, blah, blah, blah. The other one is Plausible is simple, easy to understand. But the other one is also Plausible is more accurate. So we're kind of trying to send different messages to people in different audiences that are interested about different things in order to reach a bigger and bigger audience. And talking about accuracy, this was probably the first time we actually talked about the accuracy aspect. And that was really successful. The numbers are there to prove that there are now almost 800 new websites or new people checking out Plausible and testing it for our free trial and kind of comparing it with their own Google Analytics to kind of figure out what's going on their own website. So I'm hoping, we have 30 days trial that, in a couple of weeks from now, we will have maybe a few hundred more, or let's hope at least websites kind of saying, okay, the Google Analytics is not accurate enough. Let me remove it and let me, use Plausible, use whatever else. I mean, I just want them to remove Google Analytics pretty much. I don't really care what else they end up using or if anything at all.
So it's really interesting hearing you talk about this. I don't know if you're not, but both Justin and I ran a company recently called Code Fund, which is an advertising company. And we heavily relied on our data. However, we never actually integrated Google Analytics because we understood that it was kind of the opposite of what we're trying to achieve with the company. However, speaking with advertisers, analytics is the core. It's the lifeblood of what they use to be able to determine how to spend their money. And it seems that what you have, and help me understand if I'm misunderstanding, but you have a solution that provides better, more accurate analytics to those companies. However, what's to prevent developers from essentially adding blockers to this system, just like every other system? And is there a reason why they would or would not?
This is a good question. I'm a user of ad blockers. I've been using them and can recommend to my family and so on for years now. I think it's necessary for the web as it is. So I also started working with Plausible because there is a need for better systems for website owners. So you don't want to send all the data to Google all the time, but you also cannot just go server logs or no analytics. I mean, some websites are happy with that, they're perfect, but some also want some data. And we're like, we want to give them a better option than Google Analytics. So I came in from that perspective. I was like, ad blockers, people in privacy first world, the blocklist maintainers will be like, yeah, this is amazing. Let's actually whitelist you guys. Also to send out message and to incentivize other websites like, okay, we are happy with these guys are open source. They do ABC. We've kind of tested them. We've kind of verified them. They're kind of whitelisted if you want. Let's send a message that there are, Matomo and a few others. There are few analytics companies that are okay in our opinion, and whitelist them in order to say, if you want analytics, maybe you should try these guys because then you have better data, because we're also saying that this is fine, blah, blah, blah. Because then together, that message that I would tell you, like speaking to website owners over the last year and a half, ad blockers and blocklist maintainers have a huge influential kind of, they're very influential. Maybe not all, but many site owners we speak to, accuracy, and like we spoke about before, that's one of the main things that they want. And they're all aware that X percentage of their traffic is blocked because of ad block. So I was like, let's work together with blocklist maintainers. We have this product, and if they don't like something about it, tell us, and we're happy to kind of accommodate it and twist it and change it, or you can contribute with some code to make it even more privacy first or better. And let's push that message together, and then we can get 10%, 20% of the web that actually cares about this to actually make some moves. And that will be better for everyone. In general, you will actually have less need for ad blockers in the future because you will have a better web that's focused on more privacy first tools. But that was my idea, my thinking coming from the outside. First blog post we had on Hacker News, the day after, easy privacy. There's plausible.io in the blocklist. I was like, why? I completely did not understand it from that perspective that they would block also privacy first, because my thinking is like, let's try to make the web better by getting website owners to use better tools for people that use ad blockers, people that don't use ad blockers, because the fact is still that most people don't use ad blockers. And I was like, this makes sense. Let's get together. We're all on the same page. Let's fight this together. But no. So easy privacy, uBlock Origin, there's a lot of ad blockers, lots of blocklist maintainers, some more popular than others, but we're pretty much on all the kind of main ones. And I've been in touch with several maintainers. There's some GitHub threads about it. There's private emails. There's Twitter threads. My message, the way I explain it right now, the way I try to explain to them, did not come across. There's some kind of barrier there. From my understanding, what they tell me basically is blocklist maintainers are like, we prefer to like not run any JavaScript at all. We like to block everything, and we don't want to like have any responsibility to kind of say, oh, this tool is better than the other. This one is okay. This one is not. So their kind of stance is like, let's block everything. And again, I respect it. They do a lot of work on free. They're also open source maintainers. I understand how that world is difficult. But I'm also like, but this does not help, which I hope is also their intention, to make the web better for everyone, even for people that will never install an ad blocker. Because I know, I told my family to install an ad. I visit them for Christmas. Every Christmas I go home to Denmark. I'm like, okay, guys, well, there's the ad blocker from last year. What happened with the Firefox and uBlock Origin that I installed for you? Why are you using Chrome again? And I know that the average person out there has struggles with this kind of installing an ad blocker, or when that pop-up comes from your local newspaper asking you to remove the ad blocker. There's a huge disconnect between people like perhaps all of us here in the chat and the more kind of normal web user, because I'm there. I'm like, making my whitelist on this website. I'm going to allow this on this website. I'm going to allow that. But normal people will be like, okay, let me just completely turn this off because my favorite newspaper is asking me to turn it off. So my intention was always like, let's create something like Plausible to get kind of to hope, at least. I mean, this is our grand ambition, but we're obviously too small for that. But to kind of be Google a bit of the web, kind of make it more friendly in general for everyone, not only for tech users, not only for website owners, just to make the web a bit better in general. I have not been able to get on the same page with blog maintainers and that. So currently, Plausible is, if you use the Brave browser, for example, it will be blocked. Actually, some will actually block our whole domain. So like you try to visit our, you go on Hacker, we get like in Hacker News, we get sometimes on top, and then people in comments say, oh, this website doesn't load for me. Because they have some blocklist maintainer that has blocked the whole domain, even when it's a first party connection. So you go to read our blog or whatever, and you get like, I don't know if, but it says not found or blocked or whatever, cannot load. Again, I completely respect these people. They put in their free time to do this voluntary work, but it's a big disconnect in the kind of how we're approaching the, let's make the web better. So that's the status right now. Something I never expected, but it's what it is. And I can say at least luckily Firefox and Safari, which do have something out of the box, none of them touch Plausible. So at least there's this kind of some of those, even some of the biggest ones that are used by many millions are not really touching our script. So at least that's the positive part. But yeah, I really hoped that we could get, Brave and uBlock Origin and Easy Privacy. And there's many of these lists that are used by millions of people, get us all together and I don't know, let them decide. Create some kind of checklist. Got to be open source, got to no cookies, got to do this. Make the checklist as long as you want. Just tell us what we can do to get us on the same page so we can kind of try to get this message across to site owners. Because I don't know, like you did not use Google Analytics today, but I know that many people now use Google Analytics to like server-side tracking or some kind of proxying as well. So they're actually using Facebook Pixel and Google Analytics to avoid ad blockers. They're trying to like hide around it to do it and send the data back to Google and Facebook rather than, oh, okay, there's this option here. We might not get all the same data we can get. We get 1/10 of all the data points that Google and Facebook give us, but at least it's not blocked. It's all accurate. Everything is there. So it's unfortunate right now. But again, we've sent our message to them. We've tried to start a dialogue. We've been in dialogue with them. But that kind of getting us on the same page has not happened, unfortunately.
Thank you for sharing that. What comes to my mind when we talk about this is the future of the industry altogether. I am curious about how you see your business surviving in the next 10 years, or any business in advertising surviving in the next 10 years, given that those people who are the targets of the advertising, at least in the technology area, are also the same people who are writing the technology to block that tracking. And having a background that I do of advertising and understanding the value of free versus not free and how free is paid for, I would think that everybody would understand that we have to allow some analytics, because if not, we have to go to a paid system for everything. And that's not sustainable for a lot of people. So it's a challenge, I think, for companies such as yours to say, how do we compete in a future that doesn't want us in a lot of ways? I know that was like a very poorly crafted question, but can you kind of chime in on that and tell me what you think as far as, do you see big efforts or big plans or something that you guys are trying to push to make it so that there is that harmony between both sides, the advertisers and the consumers?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're a small player. We were just trying to mind our own little business and kind of become sustainable and try to grow that, because just the fact that in the last year and a half, we got 25,000 to use Plausible, and who knows how many self-hosted installs as well that we don't track. That's already huge, and we're kind of taking it one step at a time there. We have nothing really with advertising business at all. So like there's no connection there. So I cannot speak from that side, but I can definitely tell that websites with like development teams and kind of tech resources, they're already, it's not very difficult to go around the ad blockers for websites. I would not know how to do it, but my co-founder has informed me a lot, and I've seen speaking to websites that some of them are like, okay, ad blockers are there. Let's just get our tech team to write a few lines of code and send the data to Google and Facebook without the ad blockers. So I would say this is where my thinking came, like, let's work together to try and push people in a different direction, because the direction I'm seeing many websites heading is like, let's just work around ad blockers and still use all the same old surveillance capitalism tools. And this is like, technically, it's easy to avoid it if you know how to. It's just, I feel like the way that the blocklist maintainers have handled it or are treating it is pushing some of the websites, at least, that can know how to do it to actually avoid ad blockers and still keep sending data to Google. Other thing I can say is that obviously in the States is a bit different, but the GDPR in Europe has had huge change. It's amazing what change can be done from their kind of regulator politics side of things. It came in like maybe 2.5, 3 years ago, but even to this day, and these days, people are slowly getting it and their legal teams are slowly enforcing it. And we get questions from big companies daily these days, like trying to figure out how to work around with GDPR. And I think if we can get GDPR, it's been amazing for the web. And now I personally enjoy, like when I get a pop-up that's properly done, that gives me a reject button immediately, which is the way it should be. I know like some people use like the block list that block the pop-up. For me personally, I think that's a wrong way to do, because if you block the pop-up and don't actually take your legal right that you have to reject it, you actually just saying yes to everything. And then your data is there, even though you might not see the ad, you're still contributing to the whole system. While if you actually go and take the 2 seconds and click on reject or click on customize and I'm going to give rights to this and not to this, you're actually having a voice. It's like a vote. And I tell you, these websites, we have some like huge brands thinking of these things, and they're looking at their yes and no's at GDPR pop-ups, and they're really closely monitoring that. And like, say, if you're just using your banner there to just automatically say yes to everything, you will be on the yes column, which means, okay, let's continue doing the surveillance capitalism because people are fine with it. While if you actually give your vote and say no, or no to this and yes to that, you're actually voting to make a change. And the marketers are definitely looking at us. That's one of the main like key performance indicators these days in companies, is like how many people are saying yes or no to that little banner we have on our site. So I personally, I'm going to take even if it's not an easy reject, I'm going to take my 3 seconds to click on give me options and then scroll down and click on reject, because I know that it makes a difference.
So I'm looking at the Firefox add-ons, and one of them is called I don't care about cookies. It's at 200,000 users. It just gets rid of these pop-ups. So that definitely is something that's happening. One of the things that I'm thinking about as I'm listening to the story of Plausible Analytics is that this is part of a large arms race. People want information from you, and then other people are trying to stop you from getting information, and it's just more technical stuff up the stack. You mentioned GDPR, and I really like the example of GDPR as a game changer in the whole privacy tracking industry. But GDPR was also instituted from a complex political standpoint by the EU, partially to take information away from American companies, to have an EU have an ability for people there and citizens there to give less control to Silicon Valley. What I'm interested in the future is what we're going to see, or what I hope happens, where we actually have a pushback on advertising in general as an entire industry. Advertising is the problem from my perspective right now with Silicon Valley, with Google, with Facebook. And advertising has led to a lot of issues. It's led to all of us in this industry trying to figure out how do we get information, how to not get information. And I wonder if there's an alternative. Now, Plausible Analytics is trying to get information to individual developers. And it's trying to do that in a way that puts the onus on the web developer to go and sign up for your business and install Plausible on their machine. I'm wondering if you have a game plan. Eric said 10 years. I'm wondering 25. Where do you want to go in the future to the point where advertising is really different? How do we build a more sustainable web for everyone without just doing tiny little hacks to try to make sure that Plausible isn't blocked on Hacker? Do you see where I'm coming from? I know it's a much larger question. I'm just really curious about it.
Yeah, I mean, GDPR was a great first step. And I think if there can be something similar, but actually just going after the personal data. Ads are normal. I mean, even though I may use an ad blocker or recommend people to use ad blocker, many websites that I visit, the newspapers and so on, they live from the ads. If there were no ads and everyone used ad blockers, those journalists will not be able to be paid and those newspapers might not be able to exist. So I understand that, there is a need for ads, while that is the main monetization method of the web. The way we monetize the web, they give stuff for free, put ads in there, and it makes some money indirectly through those ads. So, but I also know, like, look back, I started my first website in the late 90s, and I was there early on. There were ads before Google and Facebook, and they were contextual. Google itself made, I don't know how many billions early on in the first few years, purely on contextual ads. So like you search for analytics, you get ads for analytics. Nobody cared what other stuff you like and what's your personal life about. They just know you care about analytics. Let's show them ads for analytics. They click, perfect, it works. And they made billions on it. So I'm hoping that like GDPR, we can have something similar from the governmental side, because it has to come from there eventually, to say, okay, the personal data and kind of tracking of people across the websites and collecting people's personal behavior and interests in order to show ads, maybe we can limit that in some ways. Again, ads are important. People make money from them and pay salaries. But I also know that you can actually do ads without personal data. So to trying to kind of balance these things out a bit, because the small tools, like a few weeks ago, ethical ads, like installed Plausible, and they wrote a blog post about it. And I was like, perfect. These are the kind of tools we want to promote as well. Like there's Plausible for analytics, there's ethical ads for ads. There's many different smaller companies that do these things, like for emails and so on. But we can do our little thing. Plausible can remove Google links from 30,000 websites. Ethical ads, I don't know their numbers, but they can remove Google ads from a few websites here and there. We can all do our little part, like, hey, can remove people from using Gmail and blah, blah, blah. But obviously, a governmental push similar to GDPR would help us all and help to do something that we as kind of smaller individual companies will never be able to. So I would definitely hope that there's some thinking behind, like, how do we do ads and how do people pay their own salaries using ads? But do it in a way that requires no or much less personal data and that kind of tracking, because it definitely is possible. I mean, I don't know like sources right now, but you can check it on DuckDuckGo or whatever. You can find people doing studies on their own website and like personal ads versus contextual ads. And like they're seeing no difference in terms of effectiveness or in the kind of the income they get or the conversion rate or whatever. So you can actually do good business, both as a publisher, but also as an advertiser, just by targeting people contextually or whatever other way they can find out that's not really necessary as part of the surveillance capitalism.
Do you see Plausible Analytics staying independent or possibly joining a company like Netlify or Cell or Automatic? What's your kind of game plan?
Right now, we have no plans to join anyone. Since we became the first Hacker News post and all the hype on Twitter and so on, and our announcements of the MRR, we've had I don't know how many approaches of VCs and the companies and so on. And until now, we've like all just ignored them. I think maybe 1% of them we've actually replied because they were nice and they said something nice about the product. We're like, thank you for the nice words. But in general, we just ignored them, never responded to them at all. So obviously things always change, but you never know. I'm not going to, like MailChimp yesterday got a lot of bad comments.
Right.
Because they sold, even though 10 years ago, somebody said, oh, we will never sell. So I'm not say it will never happen. I can tell you right now, and in the future, from the way we stand right now, we don't plan to sell and we just do our own thing and try to kind of do our own little sustainable business. We're really happy the way it is. I know we say like we want to remove Google links from the web totally, but you know, this is just like our dream. You know, it's not like we will do everything in our power to actually remove Google links from the whole web, which means we got to get investors and spend a lot of money on ads and hire tons of people. So we're just taking it one step at a time. And there's really no plans. And daily we get these VCs. I don't know why they don't learn, because we've shared several times on Twitter, like we're not looking for investors and blah, blah, blah. Right. But we get them daily, like, oh, I saw the latest, announcement about MRR. I love Plausible.
We want to give you $100 million. Yeah, we want to give you $100 million in VC cash, get bankrupt so you could sell to my other portfolio company.
The biggest number I've had, because some of them just mentioned the number up front. So it was like 15 million. That was maybe 8 months ago or something. And they were like, oh, no strings attached. Here's it. Just whatever. Do whatever you want with it. Yeah. But I mean, again, also, like, I'm not like completely anti-investors and venture capitalism, because for some situations, some startups, you might need it. I mean, if I want to go to the Mars or whatever, I'm not going to do it by one person. I need some money. Or if I want to find a vaccine for coronavirus or whatever, I need some investors. I need people that know what they're doing. I need tons of resources. So in some cases, there's a need for this. But two of us doing a little analytics tool, and we want to be privacy first in control and kind of everything there the way we want it. I think for our kind of case, it's not really necessary. And maybe it will help us like hire people faster, but it will also contribute to other things such as, this month you didn't grow as fast as we expected. Maybe you should push more on, maybe you should start spending our money on Google ads. And we don't want to kind of fund Google in order to grow ourselves, which kind of defeats the purpose.
This is what I see. And this could be you call this a conspiracy theory, but I think Brave is blocking you so they can eventually buy you because they have their own browser, their own search engine. They'll probably get ethical ads on, and they will basically go head to head with Firefox and Google because, that's my thinking.
The opinions expressed on this show are those of the people that.
Hey, listen, show. I'm independent.
Actually, we've had several Twitter threads with Brandon and the Brave people because we always like, why is your site blocked on Brave? And that kind of simple thing, like some people at least, they don't expect Plausible to be blocked by things like this because they also look at it like they're privacy first, blah, blah, blah. So we've had several threads like that. Like one of our users would say, like, send a screenshot and like, hey, Brandon, hey, Brave, why are you blocking Plausible? And then there will be lots of discussion there. So we've had several of these threads. I know like Brave is using it. I use Brave as one of my browsers on my Linux. And by default, they have analytics installed. Two different things. If you want to disable them, you have two different things that are enabled by default. So they're not like completely against analytics. And they also enable the Facebook and Google Analytics scripts by default. And they give you the options to disable them, but they're not like completely against it. So some of the conversations with Brandon were I think a bit more positive than the conversations with the blocklist maintainers, because it was more like maybe there's a way to kind of get everyone together and kind of figure out this kind of approach to how to trust each other and what's good, what's bad in terms of features to have, what could be whitelisted. But in terms of selling to them or them approaching us, the answer will be no, please, the way it is right now. We will probably not, maybe we'll email him back because he's such an influential person. Maybe we'll respond saying thank you, but no. But yeah, there's no interest like that from our side, at least.
Once Brave blocked CodeFund, I stopped using Brave. I hated them after that. I was like, screw you guys. Anyway.
There's actually two stories going on in this podcast. So one of them is about Plausible's business model and how do we do analytics properly. And the other one is you're an open source sustainable business, which is super, super cool. One of the questions I have is, why is it important that Plausible be open source? Why are you open source?
So this was a decision before my joining Plausible, but I would say in terms of privacy first, it completely makes sense to be open source. So if you go like privacytools.io or that website, or you go to these Reddit forums or Hacker News, if you're not open source and you're talking about privacy first, you will probably be kind of excluded from the conversation. People will not take you serious. Open source means you are, you cannot verify everything, obviously, but it means you are more trustworthy than proprietary. And people that can know how to do it, they can actually inspect your code, and you can go to GitHub and review everything. They can download it to their machine. They can run it themselves. So in that sense, open source has much more kind of trustworthiness than no. And especially when you're talking about being privacy first, and we make a lot of claims on our website, like we don't use cookies, we don't do this, we don't do that. And if we're proprietary, a lot of people with technical knowledge and people really deep into this would not trust us because you're just saying things. We don't know who you are. Why would we trust you? So by being open source, at least that angle is kind of covered. Like you can actually go to our GitHub, you can download our latest self-hosted release. If you have the knowledge and the skills, go code like line by line and review everything, run it to your machine, test things. How does it work? Does it actually do what we say it does? And in that sense, I think open source and privacy first really are, key things together. Maybe if you just talk about mainstream audience, they won't really care like open source or not. But in that core group, the really believers, the guys that will kind of help you spread the message and will talk about you on Twitter and Hacker News, I think not being open source, you will not even be considered. So that's my impression coming kind of from the outside of being technical. I cannot read code. I cannot verify what we're doing. I know, obviously, but I cannot like go and verify it or do it on Firefox or on Mulva VPN or whatever I'm using. I don't know. So I got to trust that by being open source, having so many eyeballs on it, is that at least if there was something kind of sketchy going on or whatever, somebody will kind of flag it. And that cannot be done with proprietary software.
Which makes sense to me. And like, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone listening to this podcast, but it's good to have your words on it and what Plausible thinks around open source. Are you worried at all about people taking the code and just running another plausible analytics as a fork?
I tell you, I spoke to my co-founder. He started with, again, I was completely new to all these licenses. In fact, I had no idea. I was using WordPress and stuff. I had no idea what WordPress license was or any of the differences. But my co-founder started with the MIT license, which he told me he had no idea either. He's a developer, he's techie, but he had no idea. That's the default one on GitHub. Everyone uses it. Let me use that one. Okay. No kind of bigger thinking behind it. So it started like that. We got our first Hacker News post, tens of thousands of visitors coming in. And suddenly there are all these companies going around us and like, emailing us like, we want to offer Plausible self-hosted to tens of thousands of our customers. We don't really plan to like contribute anything or give you kind of help you with development. We just want you to tweak a few things so it's easier for us to sell it to our customers. And I was like, again, I was new to the open source. I had no idea that this is how it can work, that they will just upfront come to us and tell us, we don't want to do anything, have to help you, but can you please do something so it helps us so we can kind of compete with you and we have tens of thousands more of audience and we will kind of kill you. So I was like, this doesn't make sense. So this, how can anyone be if this is so obvious and so popular to do? So what happened is that
you went to AGPL.
We went to research. So basically, I had no idea what AGPL was or GPL or this and that. And like we announced it at some point last year. And I think 10 days before, I never heard of AGPL. So after those few emails where people were like, we felt threatened. We were like, at that stage, we were maybe even less than 1,000 MRR. And they were like, if we're ever going to pay our own salaries from this and make this a full-time job for ourselves, there's no chance we can survive it if this big company comes and just takes our own software and even with our own few tweaks and kind of sells it to tens of thousands of people. Back then, we did not have an audience at all. We were new and starting out. And I was like, this can kill us immediately. How do we deal with this? So we went research. Everything was put on hold and we went research like licenses, what does this do, what does that do, what do people think of this and that, and ended up with AGPL. And we felt it's the great kind of license for our own situation, for what we're kind of handling with. We did not know anything like the history or people's thinking about this or that, or Free Software Foundation or this or that, or nothing. As a beginners, as outsiders, we just went like, what does help us in our current problem, which can kill our own hopes and dreams? And AGPL was the one. Like, so I learned about, let's say, Tuesday this week. Next week, Wednesday, we already released it, changed the GitHub, big post, Hacker News on the front, tons of discussion about it. I did not know that like it would be such a passionate conversation. One guy emailed us and said, can I cancel my account? That was the first ever account request for cancellation and refund, first ever. And we don't really get many of these. And he just did it because we changed from MIT to AGPL, which we really, in that blog post, I really tried to explain it honestly from our perspective. Like, if you want to make this thing that could become sustainable in the future, pay our own bills so we can focus on it full time and hopefully make a difference in the wider sense on the web, we just cannot do the MIT because of this. And I thought like, this is no brainer. Everyone would be like, yeah, perfect, let's do it. But no, few people, obviously the majority of the feedback was amazing and then people accepted it and understood it from our perspective. But even one person was basically requested a refund for that kind of thing. So again, like maybe because we're outsiders, we obviously first time doing a startup, first time doing an open source project. Me as a person that doesn't even know what a license is or doesn't really know how to read the code. And we're learning a lot of things as we go. And that was a very big lesson, I would say. I know that my co-founder says that if you're doing like a database and things for developers, you probably want to be MIT because then other companies can use other projects. But I would say if you're coming from my perspective as somebody who has to communicate the message and kind of differentiate ourselves and try to compete with what else is on the market, I was like, if you're going to sell to consumers and other businesses, like I think it will be really difficult to survive with MIT. Again, as a beginner, I'm sure there are MIT licenses that work very well and they're sustainable, but I just don't know how I would compete with a bigger company, just taking what we're doing and then maybe tweaking it a bit to make it a tiny bit better because they have a bigger distribution. Just how do we compete with that? I have no idea.
Thank you so much for talking about the licenses. That is awesome feedback. I'm glad I asked. Before we let you go, because we are running up on time, I want to make sure we get to Spotlight. Spotlight is the part of the show where we talk about really cool projects, things, anything which needs love. So quickly, Eric Berry, what is your Spotlight today?
So mine today is a newsletter that I signed up for at console.dev. They send weekly tools that are up and coming. I'm a big fan of new tools and new applications that make my life easier. So console.dev does a really great job collating those.
Thank you so much. Justin, Spotlight?
So, developer, you may need a co-founder in marketing. It's by Microfounder. They interview Marko's co-founder. Is it Yuku? Uku. And that shows basically before and after Marko joined. It's a really great read. And yeah, again, thanks so much for coming on, man. It was just such a great learning experience.
Well, thanks very much for the invite. I'm happy I was able to discuss with you. I was a bit nervous. Now I cannot discuss with some more experienced people in this area.
Oh, yeah.
It went well.
That's what we're about.
My Spotlight today is Andrew Grieg, Greig. He is a Scottish poet. I picked up the Complete Mountain Poems, lyric poetry. So if that's your thing, 50-page poems, feel free to dig in. Certainly found some good ones in there for me. Marko, what is your Spotlight today?
Yeah, so I'm coming from it from a user perspective. I know my co-founder has completely different ones, like ClickHouse and Postgres, and I don't know what we're using to actually build the tool, all these cool tools. But I'm just talking to you from a Linux machine. I run Fedora, and I really love that I can have a beautiful Linux system that looks nice and works very well, and it can be as good as my old MacBook that I had. I'm also doing everything I do for Plausible runs through Firefox, another open source tool. I just love that Firefox is such a great browser that does so much for privacy out of the box and basically competes with all the billions that Chrome has to invest into their stuff. And the last one I would say is WordPress. I've known them that they're pretty much my introduction to the open source world. As a marketer, I wanted to have a website, and WordPress was the key. WordPress was like the main thing to use to create a website. At least it was when I created mine. And I've been using WordPress for, 15 years now. And I just love, again, that such an amazing open source software that allows even people like me that have no idea about code to actually write something and reach the world. So those are my three main ones.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Marko, it's been a pleasure to have you on. For all of our guests, Plausible Analytics, they have a very awesome blog, as you've heard several times during this podcast. You can probably also read every single one of their posts at the top of Hacker News when it comes out. Let's hope, knock on wood. Marko, thank you so much again. It was great. Have a good one and best of luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, man.